If you are hearing this message, it is not by accident, not coincidence, not an algorithmic suggestion drifting across your screen, but a precise moment of alignment where timing, awareness, and readiness intersect. Because there are rare points in history when heaven itself seems to pause, as if the unseen world is holding its breath. And when it resumes, nothing returns to its previous state. And January 1st, January 2nd, and January 3rd are not ordinary calendar dates meant to be brushed aside or forgotten. They are divine checkpoints, moments of evaluation where God observes not your perfection, but your attentiveness, not your performance, but your discernment, watching closely to see who senses the signal beneath the noise and who scrolls past it unaware. And, chosen one, if you dismiss this message, you will feel it later not as punishment, not as loss, but as a quiet and lingering regret, because this is not condemnation but a warning wrapped in mercy, an invitation disguised as urgency, and this moment explains more than you realize. It explains why the silence in your life has grown louder, why friendships dissolved without conflict, why doors closed without explanation, and why access to you was suddenly restricted as if an invisible hand stepped in and said, "Enough," because isolation was never abandonment. It was insulation, a spiritual quarantine designed to protect what God was forming in you before it could be exposed, misunderstood, or contaminated by premature access. And that loneliness you feel is not proof that something is wrong with you. It is evidence that something is being refined within you, something that requires stillness, separation, and recalibration. So before we go any further, pause, not out of habit but out of intention, and type "I am chosen" in the comments. Not for visibility, not for validation, but as a declaration in the spiritual realm that you recognize this moment and accept its weight, because words spoken with awareness carry authority. And if this message resonates even slightly, if something in your chest tightened or your thoughts slowed as you listened, like this video and subscribe, not to support a channel, but to stay aligned with what is unfolding. Because this space is not designed for the masses. It is for those being prepared quietly, strategically, and deliberately for what comes next. And once these days pass, the window closes, the signal fades, and only those who recognize the pause will understand why everything afterward begins to move differently. Point 1. Why you are hearing this message now and not before. Chosen one, understand this clearly. Divine messages do not arrive early, and they do not arrive late. They arrive precisely when your nervous system has quieted enough to receive truth without distortion or defense. The reason this message is reaching you now is because something within you has matured through lived experience, not theory. Earlier in your life, these words might have sounded like fear, superstition, or exaggeration, because your awareness was still filtered through hope, attachment, and expectation. But now, after cycles of disappointment, betrayal, emotional exhaustion, and repeating patterns that never produced peace, your spirit has become receptive. January 1st, 2nd, and 3rd represent a narrow spiritual corridor, not because the calendar itself holds power, but because these dates symbolize the closing of an internal chapter you can no longer carry forward. God often waits until the soul is emptied of illusion before speaking with clarity, because truth cannot land where fantasy still lives. This is why so many chosen ones report the same quiet signals during this season. Fewer people reaching out, diminished interest in surface-level conversations, heightened introspection, vivid or symbolic dreams, and an unexplainable pull toward solitude. This is not depression, withdrawal, or loss. This is recalibration. When God prepares to elevate someone, He first reduces external noise so the internal voice can finally be heard without interference. Ignoring this message does not anger God or invite punishment. It simply prolongs your stay in an outdated frequency that no longer matches who you have become. Point 2. The loneliness you feel is strategic, not emotional. Chosen. 1. Loneliness is often misinterpreted because most people experience it as abandonment, but what you are experiencing now is something entirely different. This is not emotional loneliness born from lack, rejection, or being unwanted. This is strategic separation. Emotional loneliness drains you because it is rooted in craving connection for survival. Strategic loneliness strengthens you because it is rooted in protection, alignment, and preservation. What you are in now is not a season of loss. It is a season of restricted access. God has deliberately narrowed the gates around your life. Fewer people can reach you, influence you, distract you, or feed from your emotional, spiritual, and psychological energy. This is why conversations suddenly feel shallow, repetitive, or empty. It is not that others changed overnight, it is that your frequency did. Your awareness outgrew environments that once felt familiar. This is why crowds no longer comfort you and why noise now feels invasive instead of exciting. Your nervous system is recalibrating. It is rejecting spaces that once normalized chaos, overexposure, and emotional extraction. January 1st through the 3rd functions like a spiritual firewall. It quietly blocks interference, confusion, and emotional leakage. God does this when the next phase of your life requires clarity instead of validation, direction instead of approval, and discernment instead of social reinforcement. You were surrounded before, but you were surrounded by people who benefited from your presence more than you benefited from theirs. Your empathy, insight, patience, and strength were accessible without boundaries. That access came at a cost you didn't fully see at the time. Now access has been revoked. Silence has replaced noise, and stillness has replaced urgency. Loneliness now is safer than connection was then. This is why peace arrived without announcement. This is why anxiety dissolved without explanation. You may have fewer messages, fewer invitations, and fewer voices around you, yet your inner world feels more stable, grounded, and sober. This is not emptiness. This is containment. God is holding you steady so you can hear clearly, see accurately, and move deliberately. Strategic loneliness is not punishment, it is preparation. It is the environment required for refinement, vision, and inner authority. When God restricts access, it is because what is coming next cannot be contaminated by distraction, emotional dependency, or premature exposure. Remain still. This separation is doing its work. Point 3. Why God removed people without warning or closure. Chosen 1. Closure is a human craving, not a divine requirement, because the human mind seeks explanations to soothe emotion, while God seeks alignment to fulfill purpose. Heaven does not negotiate with sentiment, and that is why God does not explain removals. Explanations keep emotional doors open, and open doors invite return, delay, and confusion. If you had been given reasons, you might have argued with heaven, replayed conversations, defended attachments, or attempted to renegotiate what God had already concluded. You might have justified behavior that God had already weighed, measured, and found incompatible with where your spirit is going. Some people were not removed because they were evil, malicious, or intentionally harmful, but because they were incompatible with the version of you that is emerging. Compatibility is not about morality. It is about direction, capacity, and spiritual timing. Others were removed because they had access to you during a phase when your boundaries were underdeveloped, when your compassion outweighed your discernment, and when your empathy allowed proximity that your future cannot afford. God protects growth by limiting access, not by explaining himself. January 1st, 2nd, and 3rd mark a firm boundary line in your life, not because the calendar holds power, but because you reached a threshold of internal readiness. On one side of that line is who you were when you tolerated confusion, inconsistency, and emotional leakage. On the other side is who you are becoming with discernment, clarity, and self-respect anchored in divine authority. Silence was the method because silence does not provoke retaliation, does not trigger ego wars, and does not invite sabotage. God removed you quietly so your elevation would not be interrupted by unnecessary explanations or delayed by debates you were never meant to win. Quiet exits preserve power. Silent transitions protect destiny. What left did so without announcement because what is coming requires stability, not emotional residue. This is why you were not given closure conversations, final explanations, or mutual understanding. Closure would have kept you looking backward, while God is positioning you forward. Trust that what ended did so with divine precision, not randomness. The absence of explanation is not neglect. It is mercy. It is evidence that God trusts you enough now to walk without needing to know every detail. You are no longer in the season of being convinced. You are in the season of being positioned. Point 4. The psychological effect of divine isolation. Chosen 1. Isolation rewires the mind in ways most people will never experience or understand. When external validation disappears, when there is no audience, no applause, no reassurance coming from outside of you, something far more powerful begins to activate within. Self-trust is formed in silence. This is why your intuition has grown sharper recently. You are no longer guessing, you are recognizing. You notice patterns faster because your mind is no longer cluttered by noise. You sense energy shifts before words are spoken because your perception is no longer distracted by performance. You feel discomfort where you once felt attraction because your nervous system has recalibrated to truth rather than familiarity. This is not random, and it is not a loss. When God isolates, he upgrades perception. Isolation is not absence, it is refinement. The brain begins to operate without constant emotional stimulation, without the addictive cycle of approval, novelty, and reaction. Dopamine resets itself naturally. What once excited you now feels hollow. What once felt intense now feels shallow. In its place, attention deepens, thought slows down, decisions become deliberate, grounded, sovereign. You are no longer pulled by impulses. You are guided by clarity. This is why conversations feel thinner, environments feel louder, and certain people feel energetically incompatible. Your mind has shifted from seeking stimulation to recognizing alignment. January 1st through the 3rd represent the neurological side of spiritual growth, the phase most people misunderstand because it does not feel dramatic. This is the internal crossing point where the mind stops chasing sensation and starts recognizing truth. It is the moment when emotional spikes flatten and discernment sharpens. Many chosen ones mistake this stage for boredom, loneliness, or emotional numbness, but it is actually mastery forming beneath the surface. Your brain is learning to function without chaos. Your nervous system is learning safety and stillness. Your intuition is no longer reactive, it is predictive. You are no longer impressed by charisma, you are attuned to consistency. You are no longer drawn to intensity, you are drawn to integrity. This is the mind of someone being prepared for weight, responsibility, and leadership at a higher level. What feels like emptiness is actually space. What feels like distance is actually clarity. What feels like isolation is precision. This is the quiet architecture of transformation. Nothing is wrong with you. Something rare is happening within you, and it requires silence to complete its work. Point 5. What you are being protected from. Chosen one. Not all danger announces itself as hostility, because some of the most draining threats never arrive as enemies, but as familiarity, comfort, and closeness that quietly extracts from your spirit over time. There were people in your life who benefited from your empathy without honoring it, who fed on your patience without ever learning restraint, who relied on your forgiveness without committing to change, and who grew comfortable inside your silence while you carried the weight alone. God observed how much life force you were exporting without replenishment, how often you poured without being poured into, and how your compassion became a resource others assumed would never run dry. He saw what you did not, the subtle envy hidden beneath encouragement, the quiet competition masked as concern, and the passive resistance to your growth disguised as loyalty. You missed it not because you were weak, but because your heart was open, and an open heart often assumes others are operating from the same place of purity. January 1st, 2nd, and 3rd marked a spiritual cutoff, a decisive moment when God permanently closed access points that no longer aligned with where He is taking you. This was not punishment, and it was not loss, it was protection. Divine protection rarely announces itself with chaos or confrontation. More often it arrives as emotional distance, a sudden disinterest, or a quiet boredom where attachment once lived. Conversations lose their pull, familiar energies no longer stimulate you, and connections that once demanded effort simply fall silent. This is not emptiness, it is insulation. When God removes the appetite for what drains you, He is preserving your capacity for what will soon require your full presence. The absence you feel is not a void, but a buffer, a sacred pause where your nervous system recalibrates and your spirit regains sovereignty. What exited your life during this window was never meant to witness what is coming next, because the next phase requires clarity, strength, and an undiluted frequency. Some people could only access the old version of you, the over-giving version, the endlessly understanding version, the version that stayed too long. God has sealed that chapter. The doors that closed did so quietly on purpose, so you would not be tempted to reopen them out of guilt or nostalgia. Trust the stillness. Trust the detachment. This is not loneliness. It is divine containment. You are being preserved, not isolated. And what is protected is always being prepared for something greater. Point 6. What happens? If this season is ignored, chosen one, ignoring this message does not bring punishment, and it does not provoke divine anger or retaliation. It brings repetition, and repetition is far more exhausting than consequence. When awareness has already been granted, the soul can no longer return to old patterns without friction. You may feel a subtle pullback toward familiar dynamics, old conversations that suddenly resurface, old emotional investments that seem to ask for one more chance, and old environments that feel safe simply because they are known. But understand this clearly. Once awareness arrives, the cycle is already closed. Returning does not reopen it, it burdens it. The weight you feel is not resistance from the world, but resistance from your own spirit, which now knows better. This is why returning to old cycles after awareness creates heavier consequences, not as punishment, but as internal dissonance. God gives signals before he gives lessons. Signals are gentle. Lessons are repetitive. January 1st through the 3rd are signals, quiet markers placed in time to recalibrate your direction. They are not magical dates. They are alignment windows. Ignoring them does not anger God, but it delays your clarity. Honoring them accelerates it. This is why the regret spoken of here is not emotional regret, not sadness, not guilt, and not shame. It is energetic regret, the deep, silent awareness that you stayed longer than necessary, that you negotiated with what you had already outgrown, and that you delayed movement even after the path was revealed. Energetic regret is subtle but heavy. It feels like stagnation without visible reason. It feels like effort without progress. The chosen ones who move forward now do not experience chaos. They experience momentum. Momentum feels quiet at first. It does not rush. It does not announce itself. It simply removes resistance. The ones who hesitate experience stagnation disguised as comfort. Comfort that soothes the nervous system but starves the soul. Comfort that feels peaceful but slowly drains purpose. This message is not urging fear, urgency, or pressure. It is offering awareness. You are not late. You are not behind. But you are being asked to move with what you already know. Signals have been given. Alignment is available. And the choice before you is not between right and wrong, but between forward motion and repetition. Point 7. What comes after the protection phase? Chosen one. Isolation is not the destination. It is the preparation. What you are experiencing now is not punishment, rejection, or delay. It is precision. This season has been designed to strip away distortion so that clarity can finally take root. When noise falls away, truth becomes audible. When distractions leave, alignment steps forward. After this season, your connections will change in quality, not quantity. You will notice that the crowd grows smaller, but the energy grows cleaner. Fewer people will have access to you, yet those who remain will feel safe, reciprocal, and grounded. There will be less performance, less explaining, and less emotional labor. In its place comes meaning. Conversations will no longer drain you, they will align you. Silence will no longer feel empty, it will feel restorative. Relationships will no longer feel extractive, they will feel mutual, balanced, and respectful. This is not loneliness. This is refinement. January 1st, 2nd, and 3rd represent something deeper than calendar days. They mark an internal permission slip, a quiet but firm decision within your spirit that says, I am allowed to move forward without guilt. You are not abandoning anyone. You are not becoming cold. You are not failing your past. You are obeying alignment. There is a difference between loyalty and self-betrayal, and you have finally learned to tell them apart. Some people were meant to walk with you for a season, not a lifetime. Releasing them does not erase what was shared. It simply honors what has been completed. The heaviness you felt before was never love. It was misalignment asking to be acknowledged. Now that you are listening, protection activates naturally. You will notice fewer dramatic disruptions, fewer energy leaks, and fewer situations that require you to overextend yourself. This is not coincidence. This is containment. When your inner world stabilizes, your outer world reorganizes to match it. If this message resonates, type, I am chosen, in the comments. This is not for engagement alone. It is a declaration, an acknowledgement that you recognize the season you are in and the clarity you have earned. Like the video. Subscribe if you feel grounded here. Not everyone is meant to hear this message, and that is intentional. But if you did hear it, Understand this clearly. Protection is already active in your life, and you are moving forward exactly as intended.